we're always excited to have a friend on as a guest, and this time we have
Tony Barletta. Hi, Tony.
Hi, well, thank you guys for having me. Happy to be here.
Hey, Tony. Now, we know you through the Dragon Con comic book community. Tell us a story. Where did you grow up, and how did you get into comics?
Grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania where the groundhog is, actually. So there wasn't a whole lot around, so I've always read comics ever since I could remember. From before I could even read, I'd go to the drugstore after church and pick out comics, and my dad would read them to me when I got home. And then as I got older, my mother, in like middle school, my mother would buy comics at the gifts shop that she ran at the hospital, and she'd bring me comic books, and so that was always something I always looked forward to. And then I realized you could collect these things, and at some point I started getting more and more comics, and I started understanding who the writers were, who the artists were, and now I've just accumulated a ton of comics and have been collecting for pretty much all my life.
So earlier on, what were some of your favorite titles?
Well, I mean, my earliest memories, I pretty much would read and collect pretty much anything. Marvel, DC, Harvey. I wouldn't say I had any particular favorite. I mean, I think I can remember the mid-'80s being when I started to actually take comics more seriously from when I was a kid, where I was buying Superpowers because it was on TV, the cartoon show. Although I didn't understand it was Jack Kirby art, now I kind of, realize I should have paid more attention to those comics. But then Dark Knight Returns came out from Frank Miller, and I was like, I should really pay attention to this. And then Crisis on Infinite Earths, and I really paid attention to that. And then they rebooted the whole universe, so I started paying attention to that. And then I just understood who the writers were and artists were that I really, really liked. And I was following tons of DC stuff right after Crisis, and got into X-Men over at Marvel with Chris Claremont stuff, and it was a great time to be a comic book fan.
That's awesome. So you got into comics about when we did.
Yeah, 80s were a time, I think, where you can look back at comics were always written for kids at some point, and it can still be enjoyed by adults, but I think sometime in the 80s they made the conscious effort to try to bring in older readers, and that's what really resonated with me, I guess.
And you mentioned Crisis. One of our favorite titles that got rebooted post-Crisis was
Wonder Woman. Without
a doubt.
Absolutely.
What was it like for you getting those first George Perez issues? I mean, both of us got them early on because we knew that this was an awesome character that really needed to be revived post-Crisis.
Well, Crisis as an event was an exciting time to be a fan because you understood, I might have been young at the time, but I understood that it was something powerful. It was something that reset the whole universe. I felt I can get in on the ground floor and I don't have to know what came before, and this is going to be important. And I was picking up, Superman, Flash, and Wonder Woman. And then to me, it was just a really special thing. Felt like I was starting at the beginning, and these characters were better than they had ever been before. And when you look at Wonder Woman, what George Perez did, looking back on it now, I feel that Wonder Woman brought out the best in George Perez as a writer. I mean, everything he touches as an artist is phenomenal, but I think the character just really brought something out of him as a writer in a way that other writers before had been good on the title, but not to the level that George brought to it.
And George was he was a writer before Wonder Woman, but do you think that the Wonder Woman comics is really what brought him out?
If you look at the comics he's written, he wrote some Superman, he wrote some Silver Surfer, but I really think his work on Wonder Woman brought out the best in him as a writer. I think the character resonated with him so much that it just really brought out the best of his writing work.
Mm-hmm.
And you could say the same thing too with Phil Jimenez. I mean, I think Phil Jimenez later on was moved by that run, and the same thing there. I think that brought out the best in his work. I think the character of Wonder Woman brought out the best of George Perez's work, and fans noticed.
What was so impressive with that first issue is it brought Wonder Woman's origin. It clarified things, and it made the origin more steeped in Greek mythology. So
Yes.
gone were the days of the Linda Carter Wonder Woman in a invisible jet, and we grew up
Right.
with that TV show. We loved it.
Right.
Yeah. Linda Carter Wonder Woman was just the best, you know. Great show from the 70s.
And the comic books reflected that style of Wonder Woman.
Sure.
But this said, okay, wait a second. We're going to take this character, bring her down to the roots, the Greek roots, and revamp her, and then put her in a modern city, the modern city being Boston. And that was so unique for this era.
I think when you look before, the comic was a good comic, but it never caught on with readers. I don't think Wonder Woman ever resonated with readers, even though you had some good talent on it, until George took over. I mean, you can look at right before Crisis, they redid the suit. So instead of the eagles, it was the W on her chest, and even the new costume it didn't seem to resonate with readers. And I think I even heard that the only reason they published it was so they didn't lose the rights to Wonder Woman. So they had to publish it, but nobody noticed it until George got there. And I think, in addition to George, I think the other key person was Karen Berger, his editor, who ended up starting Vertigo, because I think she was editor on, if I'm not mistaken, maybe the whole run.
Well, she's so amazing because she had her roots in horror and more real world fiction. So she was able to take that element with her to DC. And like you said, she established Vertigo, but she was editing Swamp Thing, which was
right.
These were pre-Vertigo comics. So the fit was perfect.
And those early George Perez issues had a couple different co-writers. I think, if I'm not mistaken, it was Len Wein in the beginning. I think George felt he wanted maybe a safety net, that he wanted an established writer to help him, but he really didn't need that. And at some point he realized, he was so strong in writing that title that he could do it himself.
I think I did read in the first issue that George did was that Wonder Woman was never really that successful a comic. But he really wanted to do this because he thought he had a good story to tell with her.
I heard him at one of our panels at DragonCon this year. He'd said that no one else wanted the book. He was the only one that in the past it was always a book that nobody wanted, that they were given without asking for. But he's the only person up to that point that asked for the character. He wanted to do Wonder Woman.
Now, Baby Don, I remember you saying that you loved Wonder Woman's armor look that was established during this series.
Yeah, because it looks like ancient Greece, like the Amazons might have dressed back then, with her gold armor and then the red dress with it. Yeah, it was a cool look for her, and the headdress too.
Sure. That whole first issue, I believe, if I remember correctly, I think the whole first issue was all Greek mythology. It really established the world that now we're using Greek mythology, when in the past we avoided it.
Well, it fits with Wonder Woman because they were supposed to be Amazons, and we get the legend of Amazons from Greek mythology. But I mean, I've always loved, studying the Greek gods, and so it was just so neat that they were a part of this.
Absolutely. And I believe George also brought out, he kept her as a superhero, but at the same time, she was an emissary of peace. And he had the dichotomy worked so well. And it was it created a very powerful character.
And then having Ares as a main villain for a while too,
Yeah,
which they used in the
that whole
movie.
first 6 issues, I think it was issue 6, where she finally confronted Ares. There was such a great 6 issues that, and even if you look at the wonderful Wonder Woman movie they made a few years ago, I mean they borrowed Ares for that movie as well.
Also, unique themes that were brought up in these comics. It wasn't just superhero battles, but there were themes of Wonder Woman was trying to figure out how to get around in man's world with so many people trying to take advantage of her and her
Right.
niceness.
And she had a publicity agent, which was very odd. I mean, it was, she didn't have Wonder Woman's best interests in mind, and that was an interesting dynamic to the story.
And that's one of the reasons why I love this series so much, because it was grounded in the real world. It was fantastic, but it was grounded. Like, you had elements like that. It was almost reminiscent of 1960s Marvel's comics, because there was the superheroes did have real world problems. Well, now Wonder Woman has this publicist that does not have her interests at heart, and we see throughout the series that this is not a good idea at all. But in the real world, how do you bring this woman with all these powers into the United States? And she has these ties with the military because of Steve Trevor. I mean, the dynamics behind it and revamping these characters and these scenarios was nothing but fascinating. I remember reading this series over and over and over again, saying George Perez is the genius. And especially during that time period with John Byrne doing Superman, it was amazing.
Yeah. I mean, the Superman and Mike Barron's Flash, and I mean, post-crisis was an amazing time. I don't think can ever be replicated, or it's hard to explain to people that weren't buying comics post-crisis what it was like pre and post-crisis, what it was like to buy those first post-crisis books.
What did you think about how George tried to take all the different lore that we did love pre-crisis of Wonder Woman and try to make some sense out of it in the post-crisis world, such as the idea of Wonder Woman ricocheting bullets off of her bracelets?
Sure.
And how that was all rooted in...
It wasn't Perez the first one who gave her the ability to fly so she didn't need the jet?
I thought
yes.
Was it? Yeah.
Again, you had Hermes get involved. Everything that she did had some Greek deity assisting her. So again, she wasn't a superhero per se. She was a child of the gods.
And George also, when the gods featured prominently in the book, and they weren't always perfect, and they had their own dramas going on, which made it even more interesting.
They were at odds with each other. I mean, especially Ares, yes. But even the goddesses were they would be arguing, like, Hera and Zeus and all that. I mean, yeah, they had their own characters too.
Right.
And the great creatures of mythology, the seven-headed Hydra, Decay. We had so much lore involved in there.
And you never saw that before George took the book. I don't know if any writer really ever went near Greek mythology before he took the book.
How do you think he introduced one of Wonder Woman's most famous foes, the Cheetah, revamping her origin story?
Yeah, that was great. She was dangerous, but felt like a whole new villain. It felt like the Cheetah you knew, but in a totally new, different way. And by the time she rolled out, he waited a while to introduce her. So we had her fight Ares for the first 6 issues. So by the time Cheetah came around, I think it was exciting because it was such a long wait. Whereas if it was in issue 1, it wouldn't have worked. It wouldn't have been as special as it was waiting to get to Cheetah.
Oh, exactly.
it was a great intro. I mean, and because it was someone that we wanted to see. So it's like, oh, and there she is, and she's different, but she's still good.
And it was borderline horror.
Yeah. Yeah, there's I remember some covers he did where it's very dark and you could hardly, and it doesn't even look like a Wonder Woman cover. It looks like a horror cover.
I think that's one of the greatest things about this George Perez era. I mean, he wrote it for a number of years, but he wrote and drew it for probably about a year and a half, 2 years. But this was a labor of love for him, and he wanted to systematically bring back her old foes, but make it more real-world grounded. Like if you did have someone who was a cheetah, she wouldn't just be a woman with a cheetah outfit on. She had to have some kind of supernatural powers. If Wonder Woman had her powers from the Greek gods, then it means that the cheetah had to have some kind of voodoo background with her. And that was such a unique take on the character.
Yeah, he did a remarkable job reintroducing so that it was familiar, but at the same time it was brand new. And also something new he brought to Wonder Woman was the mother and daughter that she lived with. And they were great characters, so it was a way for us to feel that we could relate to Wonder Woman, seeing how they related to her.
Exactly. The supporting cast was new to the DC universe, but there was a unique sense of familiarity, and I even got in some cases almost like an Indiana Jones vibe, because the professor really knew so much about archaeology. She had a library in her house, and Diana just wanted to absorb all this information.
Sure. Yeah, Diana was inquisitive, but powerful, graceful, peaceful, but a fighter, a fierce fighter. And he got all that into one character that might have never been put together with her before.
The way he made her, naive, more innocent too, but still a true hero.
Exactly.
And even the way that the way she was created in this, they said when Hippolyta had died before, and was resurrected, and the way Diana was born was Hippolyta was the one that was pregnant at the time she was killed. So that was the spirit of Diana, that the unborn baby that had been up there in Gaia's womb until Hippolyta made her the model out of sand, and Artemis breathed life into it. That was a great origin for Wonder Woman, just to show that Diana had what actually had a beginning as a spirit. She wasn't just created by the gods from nothing.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's as a kid, Greek mythology really resonated with me, and when I got to see George's take on Greek mythology mixed with Wonder Woman, it even fascinated me even more.
Yeah, without a doubt, and we love seeing George every year at Dragon Con. He said that even though he's retired, this is one of the only conventions that he will continue to attend because he's a fan of the convention.
Yeah, it's amazing that he comes to Dragon Con every year, and we've gotten to know him over all these years. Moderating a panel with him and Marv Wolfman to start the con last year was phenomenal for me. I mean, it was, what every fan dreams of, and
well, let's talk about that, Tony. What do you do for Dragon Con Comic Book Track?
What do I do? I keep track of all the comic book guests that are announced. I update the Facebook pages. If you happen to see the Dragon Con Comics and Pop Art or Comics Programming Facebook pages, I update those. So if you happen to go to a couple weeks ago, I got around to putting up pictures from our panels, so I got pictures up over on the programming page of last year's panels. I got quite a few of them. It's great going back through, brings back great memories. I organize the panels. I put them together. I see the guests we have. I think, my moderators come up with ideas as well. We get together and put a schedule together at some point, usually midsummer. And, I keep looking at guests and thinking, how do I utilize these guests? What ideas interest me as a fan? What do I want to see? And just take it from there. And then when I get ideas I feel can resonate with lots of fans, I request the large room panels. So that's how we get some rooms over in the Hyatt. That's how we got so many, and we get more space to utilize more guests. So I keep growing it. I find the right moderators for the panels. After I've shaped the panel, I get the moderators, make sure all the tech needs are met, and have to make sure that they go off as planned. Make sure the volunteers know what get on schedule, made a schedule for them so they knew what panels they were watching and helping with. So I couldn't be at all of them, but I had to have. I made it so someone was at each panel, so we were represented somehow. Because when you put on 50 panels, it's impossible to be at every one of them. But I saw as many as possible, and I was just really, really happy and pleased year after year with everything we're able to get out there.
Oh, we have no complaints. We think you do a fantastic job as comic book track director. There's always variety, but there's familiar favorites as well. It's a nice mix.
Yeah, I always try to look at it as, obviously I'm a huge fan, so I look at it as what do I want to see. And when I look at other cons, nothing against what programming they come up with. A lot of it's a little too generic, or a little bit, or I look at and I'm thinking, if you had these particular guests, why didn't they put together a panel based on this subject? I would have really liked to see that. So as a fan, and because I'm in charge, I can put those panels together. So my whole goal is, when I start, is just what panels do I want to see as a fan? Then I ask my moderators, what do you guys want to see as fans? Then I look at, I think about what other fans want to see when I see certain guests announced. So I try to make sure that there's something for everybody.
So Tony, did you used to arrange the Family Feud Marvel versus DC? Remember that?
You mean the trivia?
Yeah, it would be something like that, but I think it was fans, like all the DC fans on one side and the Marvel fans on the other side, and they would get asked questions, and it was sort of like Family Feud.
That's not from me, but it is a long-going, I believe it's gone on for over 20 years now. Van Allen Plaxico put that together, and he comes as a guest every year. So, that's just something that's, it's always so popular. We always put it on the programming, but it was going on long before I became track director for the programming. But,
okay.
It's great seeing how popular it's gotten over the years, and how I have to request bigger rooms for it every year.
That's cool, yeah, because it's a really fun event to go to.
And the funny thing is that I would say I'm a Marvel guy, and Kavora says she's a DC girl. But one thing that we both really enjoy are the George Perez Wonder Woman era. There's certain things that transcend the favor of one universe over the other one.
Yeah, I think fans recognize quality, and there are certain runs of certain comics that can resonate with DC and Marvel fans, regardless of who's in it. And what George Perez did with Wonder Woman, I think, can resonate with any comic fan, and they can appreciate what he brought to that title.
No doubt about it. Well, Tony, thanks for joining us. We know that we're going to see you at Dragon. We know we're going to see you at Dragon Con, and we hope to hear from you again on the podcast.
Thanks again for having me. It was great being here with you guys.
Thanks for listening. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and join our Facebook group. Live long, and may the Force be with you. Nanu Nanu.